This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. I'm, of course, Eben Jensen. This show is always live, broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. Don't forget, you can watch us live on YouTube right now, and the show a little bit later if you miss it on demand on our YouTube channel. Now, today we'll be back in Burundi for the latest on the controversial presidential elections in that country. Later, we deal with self-styled prophets. And our question today to you, the viewer, is what are your views on pastors asking worshippers to eat grass, hair, even snakes we've seen recently? I want to know, how are we going to deal with this kind of behavior? Later, we'll talk waste management problems in Free State. We'll debrief the trek for Mandela with Gillian Pillay, who did it shortly. And we'll close the show with the music exchange in Cape Town and the Sharks Board's view on the social media sensation that was at Jeffreys Bay a little bit earlier this week. But first, let's get the day's news from Manine Dormel.
Good morning, I'm Manine Dormel. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. In Burundi, votes are being counted after the nation marked their ballots in a presidential election yesterday. More than 3 million Burundians were eligible to vote after months of violence over President Pierre Nkurunziza's decision to run for a third term. Meanwhile, the United States says the election lacks credibility and has violated a landmark peace agreement which was signed 15 years ago. The agreement ended a long-running conflict in Burundi. Back home, the National Editors Forum has called on Parliament to grant the media access to Nkandla during its inspection of the residence. Parliament's ad hoc committee on Nkandla will today visit President Jacob Zuma's private home in northern KwaZulu-Natal. The committee will assess the controversial multi-million rand upgrades at the president's residence. Yesterday, Police Minister Nathi Nhleko reiterated that the president is not liable to pay for the swimming pool, amphitheatre and the chicken run at his home. Police at Parliament will be allowed to remove disorderly MPs from the National Assembly chamber when there is a threat to life. This has been agreed to by parties sitting on the Sub-Rules Committee of the National Assembly's Rules Committee. The subcommittee was finalising various proposals to amend the rules that seek to strengthen the authority of the Speaker. This follows the disorder that erupted during President Jacob Zuma's last oral reply session. The city of Johannesburg and Cape Town will apply for an urgent interdict in the Labour Court today. This to bring the work to rule protest by some firefighters to an end. Firefighters are arguing that their working conditions are from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m, while management says they should be from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. This has resulted in stations being left with skeleton staff for a few hours every day. In Nigeria, suspected Boko Haram militants have burned down houses that include the home of Nigeria's new army chief. At least 2 people were killed and 8 injured in the attack in the northeast of the country. Meanwhile, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari says a multinational African force will be in place within 10 days to take the fight to the Islamic extremist group. A sheriff of the Harare High Court, backed by riot police, have raided the home of party headquarters of Zimbabwe's opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai in an attempt to seize property. Meanwhile, the Movement for Democratic Change has dismissed the event as well orchestrated drama meant to embarrass Tsvangirai. It says no property has been attached. The MDC reportedly owes money to 13 former employees whose contracts were terminated in 2010.
About to that one as well. He's glad we got caught. So
and on day one of the first test against Bangladesh, South Africa only managed to set a target of 248 all out. Bangladesh are currently in the driving seat with 110 for 2.
Just 4 runs now in the last 4 overs, so that's what he wants to do. That one comes off the face of the bat, but then just off the thigh pad, and Bavuma ever so close to hold on to a sharp one. You need to be very good in there now, behind square.
Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Janine. Now, votes are being counted right now after Burundi voted in their presidential elections, despite international authorities condemning the voting process due to the lack of credibility and a violation of a landmark peace agreement that was signed 15 years ago. More than 3 million Burundians were eligible to vote after months of violence over President Pierre Nkurunziza's decision to run for a third term. Conflicts are expected to rise again once the results have been announced, which will extend into the Great Lakes region, where conflict has been rife and continues to affect the lives of millions of people. Now, our contributing editor, Vuyo Mvoko, is in Bujumbura. He is standing by there to give us a quick update. Very good morning to you, Vuyo. Thanks for joining us.
Morning, Eben.
Vuyo, just give us a quick update. How has matters progressed with vote counting and overnight? Any more incidents to report?
Well, overnight we didn't really get the sort of incidents that we saw the other day, the day before the election, where for a good couple of hours there were bombings and so on. It was quiet, but then it was the scenario that was predicted, because people who are very familiar with this place will tell you that in the run-up to the election you get all this commotion, violent incidents, and you would think that things won't happen. Then come the day of the election, and as soon as people show up for voting, and then everything dies down. And that's exactly what happened. Overnight, no incidents reported whatsoever. If there were any, we are yet to hear about them. Yeben?
And what about voter turnout and security at the polls themselves, Vuyo?
Well, from what the Commission or people from the Commission are saying, from what diplomats and some of the observers, I should say, are saying, it was a fairly good turnout, and they predict that it'll actually be an even better turnout than the turnout that was seen last month during the parliamentary elections, which was the first round of the four-legged Burundian election. But there have been no formal sort of confirmations of that as yet. Hopefully later today, when the Electoral Commission briefs us on how things went, we will get a sense of the turnout, but also some clarity on when exactly to expect the results.
Vuyo, have you had any reaction from the likes of the African Union, the United Nations, or even the European Union?
Well, remember, it's been a very tricky one for especially the bodies that you have just mentioned. Remember, the African Union pronounced long before the election started. The UN also pronounced, and so did South Africa, which is one of the big or great friends of Burundi. They were unequivocal about the fact, or their belief, that President Pierre Nkurunziza was flouting the constitution and he shouldn't run for a third term. But of course, things changed after that, and the ball really was then left in the court of the East Africa Community of Nations, the 5 nations to which Burundi belongs. And after that process was initiated, it then became apparent that there was simply no stopping President Pierre Nkurunziza from running for a third term. So in the awkward position that the AU, the United Nations found themselves in, they ended up revising their position, so to speak, to say, we are leaving the matter to the East Africa Community of Nations. If they have satisfied themselves that elections can go ahead, that the atmosphere is by and large conducive to an election that can be credible and be largely free and fair, then so be it. Now, the statement that the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon released the day before yesterday essentially said, look, we hope that Burundi will conduct the election in a free and fair atmosphere without violence and intimidation. Best of luck to them. We will be there to actually assist where we are needed. And again, the Secretary General implored the ruling party in particular to say, please go back to negotiations, negotiate with the opposition, and try and come up to some arrangement, something akin to a government of national unity. Now, from our conversations with the ruling party, they are not averse to that idea, but there are a few things that they want clarified. One of those issues is that they don't want anything called a transitional arrangement, because that delegitimizes the ruling party. They are keen on something that will be called a government of national unity, but then they emphasized, or they added a rider that said that the constitution of Burundi as it stands say you can be co-opted into government, but only if you receive a minimum threshold of 5%. Now, if they are being asked to bring on board parties that have less than 5%, then there will have to be a change in the constitution, which then may take longer, which would mean that the talks may even be prolonged. But bottom line, they said, is that as the CNDD-FDD, the ruling party of President Pierre Nkurunziza, they are warm to the idea of bringing on opposition parties, but with those riders. Yeben?
Fuyo, thank you very much for that update. That's our contributing editor. He's live in Bujumbura in Burundi, but giving us updates throughout the rest of the day as to how voting turns out and also whether there are further incidents of violence. Now, I'm joined in studio by political and economic analyst Israel Mkhize. Good morning, Israel.
Morning to you.
I wanted to ask you, the voter turnout seems to be quite positive at these elections. Is that a rubber stamp in your mind for Pierre Nkurunziza and his ruling party?
Well, it's a co-opted ballot paper, as Rasa has been saying, the leader of the opposition, because it's very dangerous to stay away from the elections when they are actually occurring. Because even the postponement from the 15th to the 21st, the ruling party could argue that, no, we gave you a window period to come on board and negotiate with us. So they had to be there and so on. So it's left to the results currently to see what really is going to come out, which we're expecting tomorrow.
No, the Americans have come out and they say that they don't recognize this election. They see it as in violation of the peace agreement that was signed 15 years ago. Just tell us about that peace agreement and how do you view this kind of comment?
Well, I think the Americans are speaking in the context of the history of Burundi. You remember that they got their independence from Belgium in 1962. From there, 1973 and 1993, there were two incidences where post-elections there was current exactly similar incidences. Then in the early 2000s, they had to get into a negotiation. Then they came to an agreement, the Arusha Accord agreement. The surprising part is that at the time, Nkurunziza was more responsible on the side of good governance. And if you look at his personal credentials, the man even has an accolade for peace and for good governance appreciation from some of the world awarding bodies, so to speak. So he's not a person who is strange to the notion of good governance. So the two things which are mostly compromised or at stake here is the question of the economic and the security question. The economic question, remember that the United Nations made actually a pledge of $2 billion US, and America of that was going to support with $440 million US. So when America makes such a comment, you'll remember that they have a very strong influence on the IMF and the World Bank, and those are the world bodies that deal with a lot with the question of funding and aid for developing regions. So to get such a negative opinion from the U.S., it's going to rate quite negatively when it comes to the post-election foreign direct investment and an appreciated environment for planting money.
What about the wider region, the Great Lakes? We see that there's been a big turnout here. Do you expect there now to be maybe less conflict in the offing in the region? You expect it to kind of spill over a little bit?
Actually, the turnout does not indicate that the security question has been answered, because we've got those, the deputy judge in the court and other senior government leaders who fled the country, and about 150,000 people who fled. The countries that are in the lake that are surrounding Burundi, they also have their own very dynamic security question. You've got Congo, where there is the highest UN missions, peacekeeping missions, where there is the situation is very volatile. Then you've got Rwanda there with Kagame, and then you've got Tanzania down there, and then you've got Kenya, which is troubled by the Al-Shabaab that is hiding in Somalia. Now, what you find is that as people are flooding to these countries, it's creating instability in those countries. And then back home, as they mobilize around, because they said they'll make the country ungovernable should Nkurunziza win. So what you find is that the biggest compromise in that region is that even the people who are asked to come and intervene, like Museveni, he himself is constitutionally compromised, because, I mean, he has been in power since 1986. You talk about Kagame there in
Mr. President for life.
Yeah, and Paul Kagame just said, there has to be a referendum. The people of Rwanda must talk if he must continue in power. And he's been in power since 1994. So you could say that, I mean, you had a declaration right here in the African Union where the Honorable Chairperson of the SADC region said, let's not yoke ourselves with these 2 terms and so on. So there is this sentiment that is rising in other quarters of Africa, particularly in West Africa, that, no, look, we are not done with what we have to do. The 2 terms are very limiting. Let's move forward. So you'd find that Nkurunziza's psychology is riding on that wave.
Mr. President for life is the problem that we suffer with. Yeah, we've suffered for 100 years. I want to quickly ask you, you've got 30 seconds to tell me what's your expectation of the outcomes tomorrow.
Well, we suspect, obviously, that Nkurunziza will continue to stay in power, but we are hoping that he will make some concession, as we were saying, to say, look, let's not necessarily the government of national unity, because it will delegitimize the current look, but he will say something to the effect of co-opting some of the at least assigning them into not so critical posts in government.
Well, I thank you, Israel, for joining us, giving us your views here on Newsroom this morning with regards to elections that's ongoing in Burundi. Of course, votes are now being counted in that country after the nation marked their ballots in the presidential election yesterday. Results only expected, of course, tomorrow. But yeah, some of your views. James Muriti says, Burundi election, was it a PR gimmick or to fulfill democracy? We all know the answer, says James. Prof says, I believe the Burundi elections got the entire continent on the edge of their seats. May God bless the elections, says Prof. And then J. Baptiste Nyongabo says, Burundi elections, it's not about going to polls, it's about doing it freely and having the right to freely choose who to vote for. Yes, J. Baptiste, I agree. It's also the right to campaign freely, to go into communities freely and speak to people. That's what it's about. It's not just about putting a piece of paper in a box. Now let's take a look at our pick of the day. Of course, this comes from our very own SABC News correspondent Sarah Kimani. Caption, tension is rife. Hashtag Burundi voters try to remove indelible ink after casting their ballots. I wonder if it is quite dangerous to have the ink on your fingers. That's a question that I would like to know, if you could go to the shops with the ink on your fingers and not fear for your safety. What do you think? At SABC Newsroom is where you can send us your tweets. Now let's take a look at front pages from around the globe. Today we start in Washington. The Washington Post reports that President Obama, facing growing criticism from conservatives and some veterans, ordered all American flags on federal grounds to be lowered to half-staff for the remainder of the week to honor the 5 service members killed at a Naval Reserve Center in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We move to the United Kingdom. The Independent there reports that police throughout England and Wales are being urged to end the blanket criminal prosecution of all cannabis growers by a North East Police Commissioner who says his force is already bypassing Home Office guidelines on cultivating the banned drug and no longer targets small-scale production. Finally, in Australia, Daily Telegraph says surfing hero Mick Fanning returned home after surviving the shark attack that horrified TV viewers at the weekend and vowed to continue in the sport he loves. He survived the attack, really? The shark didn't touch him, he didn't have a scratch. Please, let's not villainize sharks. It is something that we are going to talk about a little bit later in the show to the Sharks board. We're villainizing sharks. Look at that, a Jaws picture, as if the man even has a scratch. He got a fright. That's all he got. Take a look at what's happening around the country in South Africa. We start in Johannesburg. The city of Johannesburg will approach a labour court for an urgent interdict against some of its firefighters who are on strike. The firefighters are demanding to work only 40 hours per week instead of the current 48. Then in Brits, more victims of the gang who terrorised the Siridile squatter camp are expected to take the stand in the Brits Regional Court. The 4 men face 42 charges. Then, down in Cape Town, a 28-year-old woman is expected to appear in the Bellville Magistrates Court today after being arrested at the Cape Town International Airport yesterday for drug smuggling. She was found in possession of tick worth over R1 million. We'll be back with a whole lot more. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News.
This week we are taking you around the continent, telling you stories about what makes Africa, Africa.
We now head to the Kenyan coast where we meet a man using needles to fight a growing drug culture.
A recent study revealed that there are 850 drug addicts in Diani alone, with over 220 using injectable drugs such as heroin.
In my community, I've seen a lot of these people suffer.
The Journal, every Saturday at 1:30 on SABC News.
Welcome back. The African Christian Democratic Party last week called on leaders of Christian faith to condemn actions of pastors ordering their congregations to strip in church, drink petrol, and some even eat snakes. The call follows a recent incident by a 27-year-old self-styled prophet, Penuel Mnguni, of End Times Disciples Ministries, who ordered worshippers to eat snakes, rocks, and hair, amongst other things. In a statement posted online, ACDP President Reverend Kenneth Mashwe said, what these styled prophets are doing is wrong and is bordering on witchcraft and magic and should therefore be condemned in the strongest possible ways. On Monday, the prophet appeared before the Garankuwa Magistrates Court on charges of cruelty to animals after the Tshwane SPCA successfully laid criminal charges against him. But yesterday, was provisionally withdrawn due to insufficient evidence. Now, from our parliamentary studios in Cape Town, we are joined by the ACDP President, Reverend Kenneth Mashwe. A very good morning to you, Reverend. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben, and all the SABC viewers.
Reverend, last week you called this kind of behavior bordering on witchcraft and magic. You still hold that view?
Definitely. I am convinced that what this young so-called pastor is doing is nothing but witchcraft in the church, which should not be tolerated. He is abusing people, and if he likes eating snakes, I'm saying he must enjoy snakes in his own house and not abuse innocent people in the church in the name of faith, particularly in the name of the Christian faith, because the Christian faith teaches respecting the dignity of other people and not abusing people as he is currently doing.
Reverend, are we living in desperate times that worshippers and followers of Christianity would go to these lengths in order to find salvation?
You know, it is unfortunate that when a person is sick, they might expose themselves to things that are dangerous. but you also have an element of curiosity in people. When people hear that there are things like this happening in the church, people want to see. I remember a few years ago in Pretoria, in the 80s, there was a rumor that in Hammanskraal, the devil had fallen out of heaven. So people traveled from Cape Town, from Messina, the northern of the country, to go and view and look at this Satan that fell down from heaven. So people are curious. So I believe that there are many people who go there because of curiosity. But people have to be reminded that what this man is doing is wicked, and it has to be condemned in possible strongest terms.
In the last decade, Reverend, we've seen the rise of the self-styled prophet, not just in South Africa, but throughout the African continent. People that promise faith heal, that can heal the sick, that can do all kinds of things, including, of course, making you money and the like. How do you view this kind of Christianity?
You know, to some extent, elders in the churches and Christian leaders who have been there for many years, people with integrity, needs to speak out, bring correction in the church, because if they do not bring any correction, then you'll have people who will find new ways of making money. You'll find people who do not have a heart after God coming into the pulpits and saying, I can do what other people cannot do, making ridiculous claims at times. And because people are gullible, particularly people who do not read, people would follow such people. It is wrong, definitely, to use the church to promote witchcraft, to promote self, and also to take advantage of people who trust religious leaders.
Our Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, the practice thereof, to any person. But have we reached a point where we need to police the practice within some churches around our country?
You know, the danger that is facing the church today because of what these self-styled prophets are doing is that the government might be tempted to police the church, to see what the church is doing, and to listen to what the church is preaching all the time, and try to dictate to the church what to do and what not to do. This is something that we do not want to see happening, because government and the church must stay separate. Their functions are different and they are separate. But for government not to impose themselves on what is happening in the churches, it is Christian leaders who must take the responsibility of correcting themselves and correcting those who are out of order. Self-styled prophets like Penuel Nguni are out of order. They are promoting what is against the scriptures, because Jesus himself said to his followers that there will be false prophets in the end times. And these false prophets, for you to know whether they are around you or not, look at their fruits, because there is no way that without the fruits that are showing good things that the Bible and Jesus himself taught, that the person can convince me that they are the true prophet of God. So because you can know them by their fruits, Christians must learn to read for themselves, to study the scriptures themselves, and look at the fruits of the people. If they are doing what Jesus did not do, they must not take it, embrace it, because they come to them in the name of the Lord. Christians must start reading, and church leaders must rebuke and call to order those who are doing despicable things as are being done now by this self-styled prophet.
Reverend, I thank you for joining us today. It's a discussion that we could have for the next hour, but unfortunately time constraints cut us short. Thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully we can talk about this again in the future, hopefully not about people eating snakes.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, sir.
Thank you. That's Reverend Kenneth Meshwe, who's also the head of the ACDP, the African Christian Democratic Party here in South Africa. Now, Mount Kilimanjaro is the highest mountain in Africa, and although it receives thousands of climbers each year, not everyone makes it to the top. Another group of South Africans reached the summit for the famous Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania last week for the Trek for Mandela expedition. Yes, it's Mandela Month. This was an initiative by mountain climbers as well as celebrities to raise funds for the sake of improving the lives of young girls across the African continent through a campaign named Caring for Girls. This group of enthusiastic South Africans keen on new adventures returned home yesterday. Now, with us in studio here is our very own reporter, Gillian Pillay, and then a camera person, Dumelo Setlabetsi, who've been part of the trek up the mountain and they're here to give us their experience. Good morning, guys.
Good morning, Evan.
You guys don't look tired at all. You don't look like you've tanned or worked very hard. It must have been quite an easy walk up the mountain then for the two of you. Are so fit.
Mountain sickness does that. You can't really see how exhausted we are. It just camouflages everything.
Tumelo, tell me, what was a highlight for you? It's such an amazing thing to go on. I wanted to go with some of my friends a couple of years ago, but it didn't happen. Tell me about your experience. Enriched you?
Mount Kilimanjaro is a mountain that you can never prepare for. It's something that you can think a lot about. It's because it goes beyond physical preparedness. It goes beyond so many things that one can think of, but it's something that one can achieve. You can go walking up there. But for me, I had to work with Leanne, and I also had to work with Gillian at the same time. And I was having my camera and all of my backpack throughout. And
so different levels of fitness to be nice about it. Yes. Gillian, of course, is a marathon runner now. Gillian, are you going to do the Comrades next?
Hopefully first 2 oceans, then Comrades. But even just getting back to your question, nothing can prepare you for Kili. And it's good that you don't know everything before summiting, because I think you would have that fear if you knew everything. It wouldn't have the same impact. Knowing less is better, and then just taking it in your stride and experiencing it for yourself. But it was exceptionally grueling. It was the hardest thing we've ever had to do, and we had a lot of technical difficulties in bringing the stories to the South African nation.
Harder than even covering Zamas who were shooting at each other and all that kind of thing. Even harder than that.
Much harder. That is a walk in the park.
Tell me, it's been a wonderful experience. I can see you guys are glowing, the both of you. It's really something, but it must even make it even 10 times better thinking about the campaign, caring for girls, and the contribution that you can make, even in a very small way, to this campaign.
You know, for me, when we arrived in Tanzania, I realized that we had a challenge with reception. Most guys couldn't reach, most people couldn't call home and say, hey, we are safe, we made it safe to Tanzania, we are now getting ready for Kilimanjaro. And then everyone kept saying, as we were busy, me and Gillian and I, trying to put packages together, people kept coming to us, did you guys manage to send? And we were like, that's when I realized personally that, okay, everyone is relying on us in terms of feeding the visuals to South Africa, so that families at home can see that everyone is safe. So we really had it was challenging, but at the same time it was very interesting. It was great.
Once you got to the top, Joel, what was the thing that was in your mind and stood out for you?
When I got up to Gilman's Point, I thought that was Uhuru Peak, and I started crying. And then someone tapped me and said, no, there in the far distance, you see there, 2 hours from here, 200 meters from here, that is Uhuru Peak. And I had nothing left to give Eben. I had nothing. I was fatigued, I was exhausted. But then I had to rely on my spirituality and, something from deep inside. And I slogged and dragged my feet, whether it's 5 steps and hyperventilating. I took quite some time to get out to Uhuru Peak, and then the tears just flow, It's because you know how difficult it was just to get to that point. And it's a liberating feeling, that you've pushed yourself beyond limits that you didn't think you could go to. For these girls, even you asked Tumelo the question about the campaign. Put yourself in the shoes of a young girl who can't go to school because she doesn't have sanitary pads. It must be dehumanizing to go to school and you have this mark on your skirt because of menstruation. And that's why we can give money.
Yeah.
We can do the easy thing.
Yeah.
But the most impactful thing is to go on top of that mountain to Uhuru Peak, which means, in Swahili, it means freedom, and make that statement.
Well, guys, you made a terrific statement, not just on behalf of yourselves as human beings, but on behalf of us here at the SABC. The intentions were fantastic, and the outcome, I think, even better than that. So terrifically well done. I know it was a very, very difficult thing that you guys have gone through, but I'm sure it's something that you'll carry with you for the rest of your lives. Thanks for joining us here this morning.
Thank you for having us, Evan.
Brilliant. I want to do that one day. Hopefully I'll get lucky and someone will pick up the tab as they did in their case. Now we ask our viewers what they thought about pastors who make their followers eat snakes, grass, hair, glass, other strange items in the name of religion. This is one or two of the views that's come in. This one from Ketu Kwayama, who says it's deceiving people in need because they believe and do anything their pastors say, even eat snakes. It's totally wrong at SABC Newsroom. Yes, Ketu, it is totally wrong. Then Lucanio at SABC Newsroom, hashtag Newsroom, of course. Things like that show that religion doesn't deserve this respect it wants just because it is deeply held. Sometimes it's easy to attack religion when we have charlatans operating in the name of the Lord. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back with Newsroom right after this.
Your World makes it its business every evening to round up the leading local stories and international news to keep you informed all the time.
Make a date with Your World every evening for all the news headlines around the world to keep you abreast with knowledge.
Catch Your World for headlines across the world every Monday to Friday from 9 p.m, then Saturday and Sunday from 7 p.m.
Welcome back. Now in September, respected moguls and speakers of the entertainment industry will be jetting into the mother city. That's Cape Town for all of you that don't know. As special guests for the National Independent Music Conference called Music Exchange. Celebrating its 5th anniversary, Music Exchange 2015 will be returning to South Africa to place a focus on the business of music and will aim to empower musicians and bands with the skills needed to make a living out of their careers in the business. Now, to tell us a little bit more, we're joined by the founder and organiser of Music Exchange, Martin Myers. Good morning, Martin. Thanks for joining us.
Morning, Evan. Long time no see and wonderful to catch up. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a time when we were living in Cape Town, the good life, wasn't it?
It's still the good life. It's still one of the entertainment capitals of Africa. And Music Exchange came about because there was a crying need for artist education, not in the way that you play and perform with your instrument, but about the business of music. How do you, as an artist, look after that right, look after that piece of paper, that song that you've composed? What do you do? How do you exploit it so that you can earn riches so you don't die as a pauper? And we've had wonderful outcomes at the conference and wonderful international speakers. If I may make mention of one of them who's come back to South Africa after many, many years living abroad, is Dr. Trevor Jones, who's the biggest film composer in the world. He's done movies like Last of the Mohicans, Notting Hill, Mississippi Burning, In the Name of the Father. And he's been on board the board of Music Exchange for the last 2 years, guiding and mentoring students and pupils in that. We've got Super Heartsticks Mabuse, who's the chairperson of the board, a SAMA Lifetime Award winner, also mentoring people. And these gentlemen have opened up their filofaxes, for want of a better word, and we're bringing in 3, or in fact 5, massive international names this year, which is really, really exciting.
That's fantastic to see. You know, one of the very sad stories in South African music this year was the passing of Zayn Adam. We you know, Cape Town's favourite son, as it were, died a pauper. This is part of changing that kind of legacy, isn't it?
It's absolutely. It's one of the key things of the whole narrative. It's a national conference based in Cape Town for the sole reason that I grew up there. I know everybody. It's my lifelong passion. It's my lifelong dream. We are going to turn Music Exchange with the help of channels like yourself to make Music Exchange like South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. If I can allude, we've got an 8-time Grammy Award winner coming out this year, a gentleman by the name of Brian Michael Cox, who wrote basically all of Usher's hits and Mary J. Blige's hits. We've got Mark Moreau, chairman of Crown Talent Management, coming out. He was responsible for everything U2 did. So it's an incredibly high-level discussions, and it's about artists then exchanging and taking those opportunities and then running with it, so you don't have those problems happening that you alluded to earlier.
5th year, Music Exchange. Yes. How's it grown, and what's your expectation for this year?
It started off at a very small hotel in Somerset Road to 200 people, and it's grown exponentially, self-funded, and we're expecting 800 people per day over the 3 days at Grand West. Sun International have come aboard and partnered with us, so that's where we're hosting it. It's very accessible. Ticket price is only R100, and there are an incredible amount of workshops and keynote talks and that, and all the speakers are there. The international speakers are there throughout the duration of the day. They don't just walk in and talk and leave. So you interact with them, you talk with them, you exchange. That's what it's about.
Well, that's really amazing to see. Now, just to conclude, you know, we see DJs and the like here on screen, but I want to talk about how the online platforms has changed music in a way. And is it more difficult for artists to make money now, or how?
Music has never, ever been consumed in such quantities. It's the way you get that music out. You still need to write that hit for people to get it. But this is talking about safeguarding those rights. Once you get it onto iTunes, once you get it onto YouTube, once you get it onto those portals, how do you deal with Facebook? How do you deal with Twitter? All those things will be divulged, as well as everybody wants to tour Europe. Well, we'll dissect all of that with Mark Moreau.
Well, Martin, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic idea. Let's hope that in 15 years, 20 years' time, we'll talk about it as one of the biggest ones in the country and in the world. Music Exchange, founder and organizer Martin Myers is going to be in Cape Town. It's going to be fantastic. R100 to go and have a look. And if you're a musician that often finds yourself at the effect of other people, maybe it's time to take charge and manage your own business, as it were. Martin, thanks again.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Much appreciated.
Brilliant. Now, a recent interaction between world champion surfer Mick Fanning and a great white shark at Jeffreys Bay caused quite a stir around the world. Fanning was unharmed, but the footage left an indelible mark on all of our psyche. Sharks do not hunt humans, but this kind of social media sensation often leads to the kinds of mass hysteria that sees the ocean predators vilified, as we saw a little bit earlier in a front page kind of Jaws picture with a champion surfer on it. Well, I'm joined today by the head of research at KwaZulu-Natal Sharks Board, Jeremy Cliff. Good morning. There's the one that vilifies the sharks with the champion surfer looking up at it. Of course, if you don't know that picture, that's the original Jaws picture that the first time that sharks were turned into public enemy number one. Good morning, Jeremy. Can you hear me?
Yes, Eben. Good morning to you.
Jeremy, give us your views on this incident that caused the sensation. It's really causing the sharks more harm than good, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right, Eben. Sharks are definitely not the mindless killers that we think they are. And I think this particular incident illustrates the complexity of their behaviors. If you look at that shark, it was clearly very curious. It had no intention of attacking Fanning. It came up to investigate what was obviously a very foreign presence in the water around it. Unfortunately, the shark seemed to have got tangled up in the surfer's leash, and as a result tried to escape, and in doing so pulled Fanning off the board. Obviously, he was absolutely petrified because he knew what was happening, but very fortunately he escaped unharmed.
Our sharks populations around the world are in sharp decline, really. How do we stop this vilification of sharks, and how do we get people to understand that these really are the most important animals in our oceans?
Eben, it's a huge challenge. What you say is absolutely correct, but unfortunately there's growing demand internationally for shark fin soup, and sharks are very slow-growing animals. They don't replace themselves quickly. So as a result, they're easily outfished in certain areas. I know there are huge campaigns around the world to try and discourage Eastern people from eating shark fin soup because it has traditionally been regarded as a delicacy. But I think attitudes are changing. And if we look at the Australian situation, they've had shark attack problems on the West Coast. And one solution would have been for them to have introduced shark nets, just like they've got on the East Coast in Queensland and New South Wales. But there was such a public outcry to any form of shark fishing in Western Australia that the government was forced to back down on their plans.
I even saw calls in Australia for sharks to be hunted, apparently, after a couple of attacks, especially on the West Coast around Perth. Of course, here we're looking at that picture with the curious shark, as it were. Tell me, are shark attacks on the increase globally? And is it, in your opinion, because of our behavior in the water?
There's certainly no evidence that there's a huge increase. We must realize that more and more people are going into the water. Water sports are becoming more and more popular. The advent of the wetsuit 40 years ago made a huge difference, particularly in cold water areas like the Eastern and Southern Cape. It enabled people who really enjoyed surfing to spend long periods of time in the water. But at the end of the day, the risk of shark attack is so incredibly low. I would hesitate to try and even estimate what the risk is, but it's absolutely minute. But the sad thing is, whenever there's an incident of this kind, it always makes media headlines, and it basically reinforces people's fear of sharks. And I think we have to try and change that perception and move people's attitudes towards sharks from fear to one of respect, because as you've rightly pointed out, they are magnificent creatures and they have a rightful place to be in our oceans.
Well, Jeremy, thank you very much for the work that you guys do at the Sharks Board. I think it's the most underappreciated animal in the world, really. I think sharks are magnificent creatures that really the oceans would not be the same without them. Thanks for joining us today and giving us your views on that.
Pleasure.
Now, before we go, waste management is becoming an increasingly difficult task for municipalities to deal with. Many dumps around the country are reaching capacity, and informal dumps are springing up all over the place, including in residential areas. Some local authorities do not have the resources or capacity to deal with the mountains of trash that end up on dumps countrywide every day. But others are finding ways to combat the risks associated with waste management. Now, joining us from Bloemfontein, our specialist correspondent, Richard Newton, who is speaking to the spokesperson of the Mangaung Metro, Kondile Gedama. Morning, Richard.
Good morning, Evan. Yes, we're here at one of 3 dumps in the metro, the Mangaung Metro. And of course, this is a side of life that so many of us don't really get to see. I mean, we put our bags out in the street and that's the end of it. And what's happening here at these dumps and dumps across the country is a vital role that's played by municipalities and by people in the community itself. Now, of course, there are so many risks associated with waste management. We have the people here called the pickers or salvagers who come here to get recyclable materials. There are risks here for them. They have to be carefully managed. The waste itself has to be contained and covered on a daily basis. There are developments that are encroaching onto the areas where the dumps are, people living very, very close to the dumps. So it's something that has to be very carefully managed and managed on a daily basis. And as you said, with me, Kondile Gedama from the Mangaung Metro. Kondile, if we first talk about the role played by the people here, the pickers or the salvagers, they have to be carefully controlled. There are many risks here, but they also play an important role.
Yes, they do play an important role. For example, we have an access control, just to manage numbers and so. But what we did is that we have given them access cards so that we know who we're dealing with, because sometimes there are criminal activities that may happen if you don't manage it. But also, it is good because they also try to make a living, which you cannot avoid. They also categorizing the waste, because the waste that you get here is diverse. You have your rubbles, you have your domestic waste, you have the waste that comes from business. So they sort of categorize it, and at the same time, they also minimize quantities, because the waste that they take for recycling, it then means that you are left with a little bit lesser waste. So that is why they are important role players. Look, there are a number of things that we had to put in place. If you can look at the status of the landfill site itself, it's quite a compliant type of site, because one, we have been able to bring more infrastructure in a form of human resource warm bodies. Not so long, the executive mayor announced the general workers who would be working here. So we have enough staff, but also we also had to get more equipment. So we have enough equipment, we have enough human resource in the form of your staff, and so I think it's reasonable, and we are in line with what the permit says, because most challenges that you get within this space is that people do not comply with the permit. So the Mangaung Metro, in all our 3 landfill sites, we're a bit comfortable, really.
Yeah, those are the landfill sites that we see and are official. But what's happening is a lot of unofficial and illegal dumping sites are coming up in residential areas, on open parkland, on open land. How are you dealing with this risk as well?
Look, we are fortunate because we have a executive mayor who's sensitive to issues of environment. What we did lately with our open spaces, most of our open spaces have been turned into parks, but also you still have, of course, a domestic challenge where you'd have people who are dumping and so on. What we did, we said we will have your drop-off zones where the residents will drop off their waste and then we collect it. It's not a culture that is yet there, but we're out there to teach them. What the executive mayor has been able to do is that he has intensified the Waza Friday, which is a good campaign, and that campaign is actually thriving, because what we do, we engage all our stakeholders, whether you're talking students, residents, and other role players, to make sure that every Friday the township in particular are being clean, but also inculcate the culture of clean environment.
Thank you very much for that, Kondile. So as we heard, the municipal dumps here, very well managed. It's not always that easy in the rural areas, however, and there's not always funding, and we need to expand what's happening here also into the more rural communities and assist those district and local municipalities. Eben, back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much, Rich. Very interesting. We see people picking through our trash all over the country and all the communities all around our country. Yes, that's where we wrap it. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios here in Johannesburg every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. Don't forget, we also stream live on YouTube at that time, with the whole show available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.